Hello and welcome back to the channel, folks. Heir of Tzeentch here, and today we're going to be covering Flamers of Tzeentch, which are a very interesting and unique missile weapon available to those playing as a Tzeentch faction. So I do apologize that the content was scarce the last couple of days. I had traveled this weekend. I had expected to be back with time to record, but as things often happen in life, I was late. Didn't make it back in time, and then I've been working back in the office, unfortunately, at work, which has really been pretty crappy, and it has also reduced the amount of time I have to record because now I'm having to commute. It's also been very busy for work, so bear with me. Things are going to be a little bit crazy as I try and get used to this heading back to a different type of schedule, but I will do my best to keep the content coming. All right, so Flamers. Let's jump into them and look at the stats. So essentially, Flamers are a glass cannon. Quite literally, a glass cannon. I mean, it doesn't say anything about them being glass, but they have 10 armor. They have very low hit points, only 2313. And they've only got a few entities, only 9 entities on the settings that I'm at. I think I'm on the large units right now, not the ultra units. But they put out a whopping 338 missile damage, and a large portion of that is armor piercing. And they fire out Warp Fire, too, which also takes away 15 armor and creates additional weakness to fire. Their ammunition is a flaming attack in and of itself. They are very limited on their ammunition. They have decent melee capability in terms of damage, but if you look at their hit chance here at 28, not good, and then their defense is terrible, and put that on top of the armor and low hit points. So basically, they are the glass cannon. This unit will absolutely annihilate things that they get a chance to fire on, but they will take tremendous damage if they're charged in melee. And then couple that with the fact that they're not crazy slow, but they're pretty slow. So they can outrun infantry, but they're not going to outrun cavalry or flyers or anything else. They would be very susceptible to long-range skirmishers because they themselves are very short range and very slow moving. So crossbows would do them in very quickly. Archers, Streltsy, anything that outranges them can do tremendous damage to the Flamers' artillery. So they're a very high risk, high reward type of unit in the sense that if you bring them, you need to have a way to protect them and get them into combat and bring them in at the right moment. Let's go take a look at the damage that they're capable of so that you'll get an idea of where these things fit in your potential Tzeentch army. First demonstration I'm going to bring you all is going to be against some Khornate troops. I've got some Bloodletters here, which are very low armor and unshielded. And then I have some Chaos Warriors of Khorne, which are very heavily armored and well shielded. And we're going to just look at the difference in damage done. Now, these units are packed in roughly the same tightness. I would say the Bloodletters are in the slightly looser formation. So this will give us a good opportunity to see the type of damage that Flamers of Tzeentch are capable of. Now, as you can see, a relatively short range. The enemy has to close. I'm going to go ahead and pull the UI back on. And if you look there, that's like 35 or 40% plus the hit points of that Bloodletters on the first volley, and it was only about 25% on the Warriors of Khorne. So armor and shields definitely make a difference. However, as you can see, both units were utterly decimated prior to being able to engage in combat. I mean decimated. 12 unit kills on the one firing at the Warriors of Chaos and 18 on the one firing at the Bloodletters. Now, what that means is that this glass cannon of a unit is going to be very important for Tzeentch, because you can see the units. I didn't turn on the fire at will, by the way, on the blue horrors. This would have been on the normal battle, meaning that the forces of Khorne would have been even more decimated. So it gives you an idea, though, that Flamers are there to cause tremendous damage to almost any target. And in this case, you can see that they are equally effective almost against both types of infantry. Yes, they damaged the unarmored infantry far more, but they also did tremendous damage to the armored infantry. I was trying to demonstrate that they can continue to shoot from behind the line. Their line of sight isn't great. They'll shoot where they get it, and you're going to do a lot of friendly damage. So ideally, you want to move to a flank, and you need to get to that flank and have your shots come across the enemy unit rather than trying to fire through your own. However, if you're just feeling sacrificial, you can sacrifice your own units and keep shooting. You will occasionally get shots. So like, for instance, this Herald of Khorne is locked up in this fight, and I'm trying to shoot him at these Flamers, but you can see that they are getting a blocked line of sight from their current angle. And then over here, I move them over to do a demonstration. This is where you want to get your second shots with the Flamers, if at all possible. You can see with that one flank shot there, they pretty much finished off the Warriors of Khorne. We'll put in one more. But you can see that you can get your line of sight blocked. If you look at the terrain here, they're not up on a hill. They're not able to get up and over these blue horrors because this is a relatively small target, the Herald of Khorne. But still, an impressive performance versus infantry. I'll let you all see, though, from a different perspective over here, slightly better line of sight, they were able to fire. So I think a couple of important things here that we learned. Number one, Flamers are very good against infantry. Number two, they're perfectly viable against these infantry lords as well, as long as they have a good line of sight. And you just have to watch that line of sight. Number three, if you're going to shoot at an enemy from behind your own lines, prepare to take heavy friendly fire damage. Next test I have lined up for the Flamers is going to be twofold. One, I wanted them up against some units that had a ton of hit points. And number two, I wanted them up against large units. Tzeentch does not have a lot of specific anti-large tools. Very few, in fact. And most of those anti-large tools come in the form of magic, and that's true here in the case of Flamers. Flamers are essentially magic, right? They're shooting magic missiles. So magic is pretty much Tzeentch's way of countering large. Look at this. This Great Unclean One, an Exalted Great Unclean One, has over 10,000 hit points on the current settings I'm at and took massive damage. Now, of course, it's Nurgle, and I did this on purpose. I even gave this Great Unclean One healing because I wanted to demonstrate how valuable Flamers can be against large targets. Look at this, an unbreakable Nurgle spawn, half dead on 2 volleys, and there it goes under half on the 3rd volley. Or actually that, I don't remember if that was the 2nd or 3rd volley, but anyway, look, watch the Great Unclean One here just as an example. These large units get in, and of course you can't stop these units with you know, the typical Tzeentch infantry. But look, you sacrifice a unit of blue horrors to keep it busy, and despite the healing, they are starting to burn through that Great Unclean One very quickly. And then you can see over here that the Flamers have easily burned through the spawn. And because these units are large versus the infantry that you saw in the last one, they can keep firing quite effectively with fairly minimal friendly fire damage. It's a little more where they're shooting at the spawn, but against the Great Unclean One, the friendly fire is not that bad. And unfortunately for the Exalted Great Unclean One, he is getting a bath in warp fire. And you can see that this is incredible. Now, this is a 2,600 gold unit in the form that I've brought it here with the spell and some other buff there it gets. And, I mean, this is insane. The one Flamer has pretty much nearly killed it. The second one can now fire. So, Flamers are absolutely an anti-large tool for Tzeentch. And if you can keep them safe behind your lines, they can really, really cause some very nice gold damage. And I wanted to show you it real quick at the end of this battle. This is the one that was firing at the Great Unclean One most of the time. Look at that, 2,628 gold value from an 850 gold unit. Again, this is a very ideal scenario. It did very well, but I'm just trying to show you how effective it can be. One that fought the spawn there picked up 1134. So both of these units easily paid for themselves in that battle. I have one more demonstration I want to take a look at. The last demonstration I wanted to line up is actually Tzeentch's nemesis here, right? Which is fast-moving cavalry. Or I guess longer ranged skirmishers. It can come in either way, but fast moving cavalry is a big threat to Tzeentch in the sense that a lot of their units are light infantry and they don't have a lot of hit points, and if they get tied down with a lot of heavily armored units in melee, it can be very bad. So I'm going to let these Griffin Legion and Warbear Riders charge me. Yeah, the Warbear Riders are technically an anti-large unit, but I brought them as a demonstration of monstrous cavalry. Look at that Griffin Legion. It took 25% hit point damage on just the opening. And remember that I don't even have the blue horrors turned on right now, right? The blue horrors would have caused additional damage. Second volley, and we're down to almost half hit points for the Griffin Legion. The bears are at probably like 35-ish percent, 30-ish percent, somewhere in there. So the bears are taking damage a little more slowly because their group isn't as tightly packed and the Flamers aren't hitting them as accurately. But you can see where the Griffin Legion was more tightly packed, it took tremendous damage. And so both units, though, are taking a lot of damage. This, again, if you use single entities to blob up the enemy cavalry, or if you use some screamers or blue horrors, again, go blob up that cavalry, open fire, and your Flamers are going to be acting as an anti-large tool, just one that doesn't get into melee. So it's pretty impressive, honestly, the amount of damage that they're able to do here. However, you're going to get a demonstration of some of the weakness of Flamers. Look, even this beat-up Griffin Legion managed to get a kind of glancing charge and completely drop the barrier. One of my Flamers, and then you're going to see that they actually have a difficult time extricating themselves from combat. They don't have a lot of mass. and so it can be difficult to get them refiring. So the Flamers definitely have a weakness, which is their speed and their weakness, the lack of hit points, the lack of armor. So it is definitely going to play a role. But as you can see, they are still effective against these cavalry units. So again, they're going to be good against pretty much anything. All right, well, let's sum things up on Flamers. What we saw is that they are effective against pretty much every target. Their cost at 850 is really not bad. However, when you consider their extreme short range and extreme squishiness, they are still a high risk, high reward unit. Now, the good news for the player using them is all it takes is about 1 or 2 solid volleys, and most of the time these guys might pay for themselves, especially if you pick a high value target. Now, if you're not able to hit a high value target, then not so much. You'll need to be looking at the battlefield and picking out the key targets that the Flamers need to really put the hurt on. But I think these are going to be important tools in any Tzeentch army. As you're able to get enough things to defend them or absorb charges for them, these guys are going to pack the wallop that most units in the Tzeentch army just don't have, right? Anytime you're playing a Tzeentch, it's got to be magic and missiles, and the Flamers are no exception to that. Like, they're missiles, and they need an opportunity to do that damage. And they're going to be good against single entities, large single entities. They're going to be good against infantry. They're going to be good against cavalry, monstrous infantry. About the only things they're going to be terrible against is going to be skirmishers and artillery. They will be very bad against those because they lack the range and the speed to really do a lot of great dodging. So if you bring these units, have a plan to keep them safe. Have a plan to maybe potentially get them to the flank after the charge goes off, because they'll do their best damage. Or they might need to sit back under the center of your line and be ready to hit any single entities that are engaging your frontline troops like the Blue Horrors. Just be aware that single entities can plow through stuff like Blue Horrors, so you better have some type of secondary plan in place. Keep these Flamers safe, because they can be easily caught and killed by a single entity or other units that bust through your line. So something to that effect, you know, a good coupling with this might be a Soul Grinder, as it can take a little bit of melee, and it's also good against large from range. Something like a unit of Screamers or Furies that can at least just hold and slow down a unit for a moment. That way your Flamers can reposition and continue to fire. But they are good units. They are squishy units, and like I said, they are that glass cannon that is going to need to be niche. Now, in campaign, I would say you definitely want to be including them in your armies as you are able to protect them. And now, as far as multiplayer, again, I haven't delved as deep into multiplayer as I would like, but as with any high-risk, high-reward unit of the past in multiplayer, you would need to very much think about who you are going up against and how this Flamer would come into play. I could see Flamers potentially being quite good against Nurgle or Khorne, more so Nurgle, but I would say that because Nurgle has a lot of very slow units that would have a hard time keeping up with Flamers if you had, say, Screamers or other things to help support, or Doom Knights or something else flying around to keep them safe. Against some factions like Kislev and Cathay, I think Screamers would be mostly a waste, and they're going to get absolutely pummeled by long-range artillery or skirmishers. And so it's going to be a lot tougher bargain there to get them to work. So again, I don't know all the ins and outs of multiplayer, but I would have to say that they're probably situational in multiplayer and generally speaking pretty good in the campaign, especially when you have means to protect them. Hope this was helpful, and some of you might be saying, Air, what about the Exalted Flamer? We're going to take a look at the Exalted Flamer next time. So I saved it for its own video so we could give it a good rundown as well. It's going to be similar. We'll take a look specifically at it next time. Hope you all enjoyed this. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I'll be back with more content soon, and I can't wait to see you then.